Rich, we're joined now by Thomas Pagel, Chief Governance Officer with the USGA. It's great to see you. Good morning. How exhaustive and thorough has this process been?
It has been both exhaustive and thorough. I mean, you heard Mike and Martin talk earlier about 2018 initiating the Distance Insights Project, 2020 issuing the distance report, and then really initiating the equipment rulemaking procedure in 2021. So over the last 3 years, we've put out areas that we wanted to research. We've listened, we've heard feedback. David Abley has just mentioned the process we've gone through, and here we are now where we're moving forward, and we're moving forward with this test change of 125 miles an hour, which equates to 183 mile an hour ball speed.
How'd you arrive at your data points, and why the discrepancy between yours and what we're hearing from the manufacturers and likely to hear from the PGA Tour?
Yeah, I mean, the data is the data, right? We don't own the data. We rely on the data from the worldwide tours. And we're fortunate, frankly, as an industry to have the innovation of ShotLink, you know, our partners at the PGA Tour. We rely on that data. And when we step back and look at it, we don't look at specific data points. We look at year over year. We look at season long. And so when we look at 183 mile an hour ball speed, that's the same as the top 25 longest players on tour over the course of 2023. That's the top 25 average. And so when we look at that, again, the overall distance standard is not a measure of success. It's not a measure of scoring. It really is how efficient is that equipment when it's in the hands of the longest players. And so we felt 183 representing 25 players over the course of a season was significant, and it's consistent with what we did in 2004.
Thomas, I received a text message from an LPGA major champ who said there's other ways to make the golf course, you know, a little tougher for the elite player. Grow the rough, narrow the fairways, tuck the pins, add water. She said there are, you know, shots on par threes that are just wedges that they can make big numbers. Why not address other aspects of the game? So
as part of this process, we've looked at other areas of the game. From an equipment standpoint, we've looked at a significant number of areas outside of just the golf ball. Our green section, you know, we have 100+ years of equity with our green section, our agronomists that do nothing but think about maintenance of golf course, long-term water preservation, all those things. And they looked at setup. And yes, there are modest and varying degrees of distance impact you can have with course design, course setup, course conditioning. But they all come with a cost, and frankly, they come with a golfer experience as well, right? So when we talk about making the game more difficult, making the game, you know, less enjoyable, when we talk about elite level golf, we're not talking about 40 golf courses or 50 golf courses, 100. We're talking about thousands of golf courses worldwide. And you know, just think about it here in the States. If you have a course that wants to host an elite amateur event or a collegiate event, so to tell them the solution is to pinch fairways, to grow rough, not only is it going to take resources, it's going to take time. That stuff just doesn't pop up overnight. So the golfers that play that golf course, you and I, not playing in that college event, we're going to have a negative experience. So there are impacts. There's not a unified one-size-fits-all solution, especially when we think about it as a global game. You think about the regions here in the U.S. What works in the Northeast isn't going to work in Arizona or the West Coast, and then how does that translate to Portugal, to Spain, to Australia? This truly is a global issue for a global game.
We'll go back to the elite level in the PGA Tour. Will the rollback affect PGA Tour players on a proportional level, regardless of ball speed?
So that's a great question. So we would presume the average club head speed is 115 miles an hour on the PGA Tour. We'd expect the average PGA Tour, or average elite male, to have an impact of 9 to 11 yards. When we get to those players that achieve that ball speed of 183 or higher, they're going to have a greater impact. We're going to see closer to that 13 to 15 yard range. And so, yes, it's going to impact golfers differently. But what we also see is based on impact, based on spin, based on these other variables around hitting a ball, by the time you get to your 5-iron, this is even at the elite level, we would expect that there would be no distance change. So this really is about drivers.
Are you potentially pushing the Peter Malnati's of the world, the shorter hitters, out of the game? I mean, is there a risk that in an attempt to decrease the emphasis on driving distance, you're actually putting more of an emphasis on hitting?
That emphasis on hitting, that emphasis on trying to get longer has existed as long as the game has. Every generation has had the longest or longer golfers. Every generation has had a number of golfers trying to get longer. It's all relative to the moment in time, the group you're playing against, and frankly, we don't see that changing. So even after this comes into effect in 2028, just as what David Abley said, we expect players to continue to get bigger, faster, stronger, continue to swing harder, continue to gain distance, and we're okay about that. What this is just trying to slow the pace of that game, not stop it.
We've talked a lot about the recreational game, about the male professional game. What have you heard in your conversations from the LPGA and the LET? Are you hearing different things from them, for example, than you've heard from the PGA Tour or DP World Tour?
Yeah, I mean, as we've gone through this process, I mean, if I'm being honest, a lot of what we heard is, well, distance isn't a problem for us. We're not forcing golf courses to get longer, so we're really not going to think about it. You tell us what we need. Now, when we came out earlier this year with the model local rule, you know, talking about a model local rule and the feedback we got, it wasn't just from the tours, it wasn't just from tour players, it wasn't just from the manufacturers, and frankly, the manufacturers all had varying opinions. We heard about practical challenges with the model local rule, whether it be the amateur level, how do you define elite, but certainly the LPGA level. I mean, I know Mike and Molly had a number of conversations, and they were going to be forced with the decision. Do we remain tied to the professional game, or do we remain tied to the recreational game? And so I think an outcome of all of this, of the process, of the change across the game, I think what you're going to hear is that they're happy that they're not going to be forced to make that choice.
With respect to speed and distance, what are you seeing at the junior levels, the sort of AJGA, and how does that help you sort of attempt to forecast the future?
Yeah, I mean, people will say you don't have a crystal ball. Like, we're going to peak at some point. And we might peak, but we just don't see that. I mean, this next generation of golfers, you see the collegiate game, you see the amateur game, you see the junior game, and they're achieving ball speeds that 10 years ago we wouldn't have thought of. And they're achieving those ball speeds with accuracy. They're achieving those ball speeds, you know, and being successful in playing the game. And so the future's in front of us. It's the collegiate game, it's the amateur game, it's the junior game, and frankly, they're only going to continue to get better. They're only going to continue to increase that speed.
What was the main reason behind having two separate start dates, as it were, 2028 and 2030? Because essentially you have bifurcation for a couple of years.
Yeah, and so the 2028, again, that's in response to the feedback. Originally, we had proposed 2026, and we heard loud and clear from the manufacturers, we need more time. We felt that was appropriate. So 2028, this will take effect. The 2030 is really more of a practical consideration. We know that golfers are going to have product in their trunk, in their garage, in their golf bag. We want them to be able to go out in 2028, use the balls that are still in their bag, go out and play it, feel like they're playing under the rules of golf, post to their handicap, and enjoy the game. And then by the time we get to 2030, that inventory, whether it be at the retail level or in your trunk or in your bag, will have cycled through, and everybody will be playing the balls that conform to this new standard. So it's practical as much as anything.
All right. We're hearing from anti-rollback factions that, you know, distance hasn't gone wildly up. They'll cite one statistic as an example, that in 2007, Hank Keeney led the PGA Tour at 321 yards per pop. And that's the same Cameron Champ hit it in leading the PGA Tour in 2022. What's your counter to that?
Yeah, I would say the risk in looking at single data points or single players is it just is a single data point or a single player. Our focus is on a much more robust set of data year over year, looking at multiple players. But you're always going to have those outliers, right? That year that Hank Keeney was at 321, I think the next year he was at 314 leading the tour. In 2022, it was Cameron Champ at 321. This year, it was Rory McIlroy at 326. So you see a lot of ebbs and flows. But there is a fact, and when we look at, we do this every year, we issue what we call an annual drive distance report, where we analyze distance data across 7 worldwide tours, men and women. And one of the statistics we track are percentage drives within yardage chunks. In that same time period with Hank Keeney, 26% of drives on the PGA Tour that year were at 300 yards or longer. In 2022 and 2023, that's 50%. So it's not just the long player, it's the entire group getting longer. And frankly, that's consistent with the data that we've tracked since 1980.
And clearly so much data has gone into this announcement today, but is there any concern about just the aspirational aspect of the game for the recreational player? Just the hint of the game becoming more difficult for that striver who wants to break 80?
Look, the game is aspirational and will always be aspirational. I mean, people try and simplify the equation to distance equals enjoyment. I think the equation is much more complicated than that. It's distance, it's venue, it's the challenge of the game, it's the cost of the game, it's how long it's going to take you to play. All those variables factor into your enjoyment. And so at the recreational level, if we're talking 5 or less, so 3 yards on average, is that going to make the game less enjoyable? I would not think so because of all the other variables that go into that equation.
We can get wonky with you, I know that. You know who Mark Brody is.
Correct.
The creator of Strokes Gain, data guru. He has, put out a paper that respectfully disagrees with your position. Best as you can, What's the central sort of thesis of Mark's position, and why do you guys disagree with it?
So first of all, ton of respect for Mark Brody. He is brilliant. He did a lot of work for us as part of our Distance Insights report. And so his fingers are on that project as well, that lengthy 100-page report with 56 different libraries. The white paper that he put out really was focused on strokes gained, was focused on scoring, was focused on success. This test has never been about scoring or success. The overall distance standard, created in 1976, was to put a limit on how far a ball can travel when it's in the hands of the longest players. 109-mile-an-hour club head speed at the time. We updated it in 2004 to 120, and now we're updating it to 125. So we don't look at success. We don't look at scoring. Tours can manage that. And frankly, when you look at strokes gained, it's a relative measure. So as the entire field goes up with distance, your relativity in distance and your success as a result of distance is going to be relative to that same group moving along the spectrum. So we've responded. We've actually had some great one-on-one dialogue with Mark Brody where we've offered some suggestions, some improvements to his analysis. He's taken us up on some of that. I can't speak to that for him. But again, just like the rest of the industry, a lot of people like to suggest or think that it's the governing bodies and we're sitting back in our offices and we're just collaborating USGA and RDA. It's a cross-industry collaboration. We're having weekly, if not daily, conversations with manufacturers, with the tours, with people like Mark Brody to better understand the subject and, frankly, understand all views, all perspectives, and make a balanced decision.
Speaking of conversation and dialogue, why not one more comment period? Why a final decision this morning?
Yeah, well, as we've gone through this process, especially over the last 3 years, we've put a lot out in the community. And one of the things we first put out was 125 to 127 mile-an-hour club head speed across the game. We've heard feedback on that. So there's nothing, we're not sharing anything new today or anything substantially different. And so we feel comfortable and confident that we're not going to learn anything new. We're not going to hear anything different from a comment period. Frankly, this is a discussion that the game has gone through for decades, and we felt it was important to put closure to it. Let's make a decision. We've established the time horizon of 28 to allow for the game time to adapt. And it's time for the game to focus on other things.
I've heard the concern, Thomas, that this could impact pace of play, particularly at the amateur level, even at the professional level. If you look at, say, Riviera, with guys able to knock it on 10, 11, 17, that leads to backups and slower rounds of golf. But as it relates to the amateur, very simply, if theoretically they have a longer club in because of this distance rollback, they're more likely to miss greens and end up in a bunker, and therefore rounds are taking longer. What's your comeback to that?
First of all, I'd say pace is probably as complicated of a topic as distance is. There are so many variables that go into pace of play and the study of pace of play. I would just tell you that if we step back and we think about this in practical terms, again, at the recreational level, we're looking at 5 or less yards. So again, if you're looking at 3 yards, it's not going to cause a significant disruption in your game or how you play your game. And again, if you want that landing zone to be the same, if you're a course operator and pace of play is a concern for you, as Mike said, you can simply move those tees forward and offer the same experience where the player's having the same club and the same yardage in as they did before.
What happens next? When might this happen again? 20 years from now, 10 years from now? Unknown at this point?
It's unknown, right? But as we've said, we fully expect that distance will continue to increase, right? That is not going to change in 28. This is just going to slow the pace down. But we're going to find ourselves 15, 20 years, probably right back to where we are now, and we'll have to have another discussion as an industry based on data and likely make future decisions.
How do you suppose elite players will go about recouping this distance loss?
I think it's going to be approach. I think that they're going to look to continue to optimize their swing, optimize their approach, launch angles, spin rates, all those things. There's, you know, as David was saying, there's so many things that they can do post-production where the manufacturers are going to work with the drivers and they're going to work with the balls, and they're going to get a lot of this back. And we're okay with that. Again, this is not about stopping distance. This is about slowing the pace.
You've also heard elite players say, well, you know, if you want to impose a penalty, make it spinnier. So that if I'm going at it at 185, 188, slightest miss hit, goodbye. How about the spin?
Yeah, the spin on a ball, it really is club and ball related in order to achieve, you know, what we think of 30 years ago with the ball being more spinnier. And unless we were to go back to a wood driver or a driver that had characteristics of a wood driver, if you put that amount of spin on a ball, manufacturers and players are just going to adjust the driver to negate that impact. So that it sounds like a solution. We've done research. We've had third parties do research on our behalf, and we just don't find that to be a solution with the modern driver.
Thomas, I know you've been busy. A lot of layers to this onion. We appreciate your time today.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Thomas.